The restaurant was always full of noise, movement, and conversations, but the young waiter moved through it quietly, almost like he had trained himself to take small steps that no one noticed. He wasn't the type who talked a lot or tried to make anyone laugh. Instead, he stayed focused on his work, carried the trays carefully, and kept his eyes down so he wouldn't disturb anyone. Most of the guests hardly remembered seeing him, and even many of the staff forgot he was around until they needed something, even though he worked hard every day. He often heard other waiters joking about him when they thought he couldn't hear. They teased him for being too quiet, too calm, too serious. Some even said he didn't fit in because he wasn't flashy or confident like the others. But he never argued back. Every time he heard their comments, he just took a breath, swallowed the feeling inside his chest, and continued with his work. It wasn't worth fighting about. He needed the job. He needed the stability. What none of them knew was that he wasn't quiet because he was shy. He wasn't distant because he didn't care. He was quiet because he carried too much inside, memories he couldn't share, and a life he had left behind. Years ago, everything was different. Music had once filled his world, not footsteps and the sound of plates. People had once praised him, not ignored him. But life had taken a sharp turn, and now he only wanted peace and a simple routine. The restaurant gave him that, even if it also came with lonely moments. The place where he worked was known for hosting wealthy clients, business owners, travelers, and sometimes even famous people. Large paintings decorated the walls, and tall windows let in warm gold light in the evenings. Soft music always played in the background, and fresh flowers sat on every table. But the most eye-catching thing in the entire room was a grand piano standing near the center. Almost everyone noticed it the moment they walked in, even if no one touched it. It was polished every morning until it shined like a mirror. Guests loved the look of the piano, but it was mostly there as decoration. The restaurant hired musicians only on weekends, and on weekdays it stayed quiet. Still, every time the waiter passed by it, his steps slowed for a moment. He never stopped walking fully, never reached out to touch it, but his eyes lingered on it long enough for old memories to whisper through him. The feel of smooth keys under his fingers. Late nights practicing until his hands hurt. Applause he once heard on small stages. He pushed the thoughts away every time. His life wasn't about that anymore. A few of the older staff members knew he liked the piano, because once, months ago, when no one else was around, he had paused near it longer than usual. One of the cooks had seen him and joked about it the next day. After that, some waiters teased him about dreaming too big, saying things like he probably imagined himself as some great musician. They laughed as if the idea was ridiculous. But he never said yes or no. He just kept doing his job because he didn't want anyone asking questions. Asking questions meant digging into his past, and that was something he wanted to avoid. Most of his days followed the same pattern. He arrived early, changed into his uniform, tied his apron, and walked out onto the floor. He carried food, cleared tables, refilled glasses, and stayed polite no matter what happened. Some guests were kind, thanking him with warm smiles. Others spoke to him without looking at him, treating him like part of the furniture rather than a person. He learned not to take anything personally. People were how they were. He just needed to survive and keep moving back despite all of this. He had a gentle way about him that guests didn't always notice, but sometimes felt. When someone dropped something, he hurried to help without making them feel awkward. When a child cried, he brought a small dessert to comfort them. When an older customer struggled to stand, he offered his arm without hesitation. His kindness came naturally, soft and steady. But the world moved too fast for most people to appreciate it. He lived alone in a small apartment not far from the restaurant. The building was old, the walls thin, and the furniture simple. But it was quiet, and that was all he needed. Every morning before leaving for work, he sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, letting his mind settle. He tried not to think about the past. Some days he succeeded. Other days, the memories were louder. A room filled with sheet music, a teacher correcting him, his family clapping after his first performance. And then, the day everything changed, he tried not to remember that day. But memories have their own way of appearing without permission. That was why he stayed busy at work. The faster he moved, the less time he had to think. But even then, he couldn't escape the piano. Every time someone touched its cover or walked past it, his heartbeat reacted. It was as if the instrument still knew him, even if he didn't want to know it anymore. Yet no matter how much he tried to avoid the past, something inside him wasn't fully ready to let it go. Sometimes, when the restaurant was closed and the lights were dim, he allowed himself one quiet moment. He would stand near the piano and look at it, letting the soft reflection of the overhead lights shimmer across its surface. He never lifted the lid, never dared to touch the keys, but he stood close enough to feel the memory of what once was. Just long enough to remember that once, long ago, music had been the thing that gave him hope. But that hope had been taken from him, and he wasn't sure he could ever trust it again. Now he tried to live simply, safely, without drawing attention. Every day he reminded himself that his job was steady and honest. It allowed him to survive. It allowed him to breathe. That should have been enough. Still, deep down, a small, quiet ache lived inside him. It wasn't the kind of pain that made someone cry. It was the kind that settled into the heart and stayed there for years. The kind that made someone walk a little slower past a piano. The kind that made someone keep their dreams locked away to avoid feeling them break again. The people around him never noticed that ache. They only saw a quiet young man who blended into the background. When the staff joked about him, they didn't realize their words sometimes hit an old wound. When guests ignored him, they didn't know he once stood in front of large crowds without fear. They had no idea who he had been before he put on a uniform and tied an apron around his waist, even on the busiest nights. When every table was full and his arms ached from carrying trays, he still moved with the same calm manner. He didn't rush, he didn't snap, and he didn't let frustration show. It was easier that way. He learned long ago that when he stayed quiet, the world around him stayed predictable. Predictable was safe. Predictable helped him breathe. What he didn't know was that life was about to shift again. Not in a dramatic or loud way at first, but in small moments, quiet decisions, and unexpected encounters. The kind of change that starts like a ripple in water, small, gentle, almost invisible before growing into something powerful enough to move everything. Soon someone would enter the restaurant who would not overlook him. Someone who would watch him closely, study the way he carried himself, and notice details others ignored. Someone who had a reason for paying attention. And that someone would become the beginning of a moment that would bring his past back into the room whether he wanted it or not. But for now, on this ordinary evening, he continued wiping down a table near the glowing piano, unaware that the next few days would challenge everything he believed about his own life. He only felt the same quiet ache inside him, the same routine around him, and the same silent tug he always felt whenever he stood too close to the piano. He stepped away from the table, took a slow breath, and returned to his work. He didn't know it yet, but this was the last night his life would look ordinary. Very soon, the world would see a part of him he had tried for years to hide. And nothing would be the same after that. The evening started like any other, with soft lights glowing across the restaurant and the sound of quiet conversations filling the air. The young waiter moved from table to table with his usual careful steps, carrying plates and glasses without letting anything shake in his hands. He had learned to stay steady, no matter how busy the room became. It helped him stay invisible, and staying invisible made everything easier. But something felt a little different tonight, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way the air seemed heavier, or how the staff whispered more than usual. Or maybe it was just his own mind playing tricks on him again. Either way, he kept working, because that was the only thing he knew how to do without thinking too much. Outside, the sound of a car door closing echoed faintly through the entrance. One of the hosts straightened their posture, smoothing their uniform quickly. That was always the sign that someone important had arrived. Big clients visited the restaurant often, but the staff acted differently when someone with influence or power walked in. The doors opened, and a group of people stepped inside, dressed in expensive clothes, their voices confident and full of easy laughter. At the head of the group was a man well known among business circles, someone the restaurant staff talked about almost every week. He was wealthy, successful, and had a reputation for noticing things others didn't. Some said he had an eye for talent. Others said he had an eye for weakness. No one seemed to know which one was true. Maybe both. The young waiter saw the group enter, but as always, he kept his eyes down. In his mind, all guests deserved polite service, whether they were famous or not. Besides, he didn't want to draw any attention to himself. Attention always led to questions, and questions led to memories he wasn't ready to face. The millionaire took a seat at one of the center tables, close to the grand piano. His guests joined him, filling the space with cheerful conversation. Their clothes looked newer than the chairs they sat on. Their watches sparkled under the lights. Their smiles were confident, the kind that came from a life where doors opened before they even reached them. Other waiters rushed to take care of the table, wanting to impress. The young waiter stayed back, focusing on his assigned section. He didn't want trouble, but fate had a strange way of finding people who ran from it. While carrying a tray toward another table, he heard one of the waiters whisper loudly within earshot of the millionaire's group. "Have you seen him? He moves like he's scared of everything." The waiter tilted his head toward the young man. Probably never did anything interesting in his life. The words stung faintly, not because they were harsh, but because they came too close to a truth. He didn't want people touching. But he didn't react. He just lowered his gaze and kept walking. He had heard worse before, but the millionaire had heard the comment too. His eyes followed the young waiter with surprising focus, as though trying to understand something only he could sense. When the young man passed near the piano, the millionaire's gaze sharpened, like a puzzle piece had clicked into place in his mind. A few minutes later, the young waiter approached their table with water refills. He placed the glasses gently and stepped back, ready to leave without making a sound. But before he could turn away, the millionaire raised a hand. "You," he said calmly. "Come here for a moment." The waiter froze. Moments like this always made his heart beat a little too fast. He didn't like being singled out, especially not in front of people who stared openly. But he walked toward them anyway, because refusing wasn't an option. His steps felt heavier with every inch. He stopped beside the table, standing straight with his hands behind his back. "Is there anything you need?" he asked softly. The millionaire studied him for a second before tilting his head toward the piano. "Do you know how to play?" The question hit him harder than expected. He felt his chest tighten. For a second, he forgot how to breathe. His eyes dropped to the floor automatically. He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. A few of the guests chuckled lightly, thinking it was nothing more than a casual question. One of the waiters standing nearby smirked, clearly expecting the young man to embarrass himself. "He play that? He probably doesn't even know what half the keys do," the waiter said in a low voice, not low enough. The young man felt heat rise inside him, not anger, but something sharp and familiar shame. the kind he thought he had buried. But he still didn't say anything. Silence felt safer than words. Words invited attention. The millionaire didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, observing the young man like he was trying to read a book without opening it. Then he spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "Why don't you show us?" The room around them seemed to pause. The chatter slowed. The air thickened. The waiters standing nearby exchanged excited looks. Some guests turned their heads, sensing something unusual happening. The young waiter thought he misheard at first. "Show us?" He repeated softly. "Play something," the millionaire said. "Anything." Those words were simple, but to the young man they felt heavy, almost frightening. He looked at the piano, shining under the warm lights, and then looked away quickly. He couldn't do this. Not here. Not now. His throat felt tight, and his hands trembled slightly, hidden behind his back. He wanted to refuse. He wanted to say he couldn't. But the millionaire's gaze was fixed on him, waiting, expecting. And everyone else stared too. The attention he always tried to avoid now trapped him in a circle of eyes. One of the guests laughed softly. "Let's see what the quiet one can do." Their tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. It was the kind of tone people used when they expected to be entertained at someone else's expense. The young waiter felt small, like the world had shrunk around him. The piano seemed so close and yet so far. He didn't know whether the millionaire wanted to humiliate him or test him. Maybe both. Maybe neither. But the pressure was real, and it pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't lift. He swallowed hard. "I'm not sure I can," he whispered. Another waiter scoffed loudly. "See? He can't even say it clearly. Why would he know how to play?" The comment earned a few more laughs, but instead of dismissing him, the millionaire gestured toward the piano again. "Try," he said gently. "Just try." The young man hesitated, his breath shaky. His heart rumbled inside his chest like distant thunder. Memories he spent years pushing away suddenly rose, sharp and bright. The feel of smooth keys. The sound of soft notes filling a room. Applause that once made him smile. And then the moment everything fell apart. The moment he chose to stop, his hands twitched at the thought. Not with fear, but with something he didn't want to recognize. He was trapped between the past he ran from and the present he didn't want to damage. If he walked away, people would laugh. They already expected him to fail. But if he walked toward the piano, he would be walking toward the very thing he promised himself he would never touch again. He stood still for a long moment. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his choice. Guests leaned slightly forward. The staff exchanged whispers. Even the soft background music sounded quieter, as if it knew something important was about to happen. Finally, he looked at the piano again. The lights reflected gently across its smooth surface. It looked harmless, but it wasn't, not to him. It carried every memory, every moment, every heartbreak he once lived. Still, a small part of him, buried deeply under layers of silence and fear, felt something stir. A tiny spark. A forgotten voice. A whisper from the life he once lived. He took a slow breath, and for the first time that night, he lifted his eyes, not at the millionaire, not at the guests, but at the piano itself. He didn't agree. He didn't refuse. But he took one step forward. And then another dot. Every step felt like a step into a past he had locked away. The staff watched with wide eyes. The guests grew silent. Even the millionaire leaned forward slightly, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment. The young waiter stopped just a few steps away from the piano. His hands shook at his sides. His breath trembled. The room around him blurred a little. All he could see was the instrument that once shaped his world. He wasn't ready. He was terrified, but he didn't walk away, not this time. The young waiter stood before the piano, feeling the weight of countless eyes on him. The room, usually full of soft music and gentle conversation, seemed strangely quiet. Even the air felt different, as if it held its breath just like he did. His heart beat so loudly he thought people might hear it. His hands trembled in a way he hadn't felt in years. He stared at the piano, unsure whether to take another step. He didn't want attention. He never wanted it. But the moment had arrived, pushing him into a place he never planned to be again. The millionaire's request wasn't loud or cruel, but it had shaken something inside him, a piece of his past he tried so hard to hide. Behind him, a few guests whispered softly. The staff watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement. Some waited for him to make a mistake. Others seemed confused about why the millionaire even cared. The young waiter felt all those expectations pressing down on him. He took another small step toward the piano. His breath wavered. He didn't dare sit yet. Instead, he ran his eyes over the polished surface, the soft reflection of the restaurant lights dancing across it. Memories stirred again, rising from deep within him like echoes from another life. He tried to push them away, but they came back with a strength he couldn't stop. He remembered sitting at a different piano years ago, his fingers young and unsure at first, then growing steadier with practice. He remembered hours spent repeating the same pieces, trying to master every detail. He remembered the warmth on his face when people clapped, calling him talented, saying he had a bright future. And then he remembered the silence that came after everything went wrong. A silence so heavy that even music couldn't break it. That silence was what had followed him into this job, into every step he took inside the restaurant, into the way he kept his eyes down and his voice soft. He chose this life because it felt safer than chasing dreams that could fall apart again. But now, standing in front of the piano, he wondered if the silence had protected him or trapped him. The millionaire watched him quietly, studying every small movement. There was something unusual about his gaze. It wasn't mocking or impatient. It was curious, almost expectant, as if he already knew something the young waiter didn't. But that only made the waiter more nervous. Why would someone like him care what a simple waiter could or couldn't do? The young man finally lowered himself onto the bench. His legs felt weak, and his palms were damp with nervous sweat. He didn't touch the keys. Not yet. Instead, he stared at his hands, remembering how they once moved so easily across a keyboard. Now they felt heavy, unsure, as though years of hiding had trained them of confidence. He heard someone behind him whisper, "He's going to mess up. Watch." Another person snickered softly. Their words stung, but not in the sharp way insults usually do. They stung because he feared they might be right. He didn't know if he could play anymore. He didn't know if the music inside him still existed. He lifted his hands slightly, but they hovered uncertainly over the keys. He felt the world closing in from every direction. His heartbeat grew louder. The lights above him seemed brighter. His breath felt too shallow. For a moment, he thought about standing up and walking away. He imagined returning to the kitchen, pretending none of this had happened. He imagined going home afterward, sitting in the quiet of his small apartment, telling himself he made the right choice by not trying. But another part of him, small, quiet, yet stubborn, told him to stay seated. He closed his eyes for a moment. The noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by a memory he didn't expect, the sound of a soft voice once telling him to trust himself. He hadn't heard that voice in a long time, but it came back now like a gentle reminder. It didn't fix his fear, but it gave him enough strength to breathe again. He opened his eyes and finally placed his fingers on the keys. The touch sent a chill through him. The smooth surface felt familiar, painfully familiar. He pressed down softly, producing a single note. It was quiet but clear. The sound made several people turn their heads, surprised he had actually started. He played another note, then another. The keys felt strange, yet comforting. His fingers moved slowly at first, shaky and unsure, like someone learning to walk again after years of sitting still. But the more notes he played, the more something old and hidden began to awaken inside him. He wasn't playing a real melody, yet just a few soft tones, but each one felt like a step into long-buried memories. He took a deep breath, steadied his fingers, and allowed the scattered notes to form a gentle pattern. The sound was simple, nothing impressive, but it carried emotion. It carried truth. And it carried the years he had spent avoiding music. The restaurant grew quieter. Conversation softened. The guests leaned in slightly, curiosity replacing amusement. Even the staff, who once joked about him, now watched with unexpected interest. The young waiter kept his eyes on the keys, not looking at anyone. He didn't want to see their expressions yet. He just focused on letting his fingers move. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, a strange calmness began to slip into his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time. He closed his eyes again, just for a moment, and let his hands move in a slow, hesitant rhythm. The melody wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was real. It was honest. And the room responded to that honesty in a way he did not expect. The restaurant felt different now, almost softer. People who had been laughing earlier listened quietly. The staff who had mocked him stood frozen in place. Even the millionaire watched with a steady gaze, his face unreadable but focused. The young waiter didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know what song he was playing. Maybe it wasn't even a real song, just pieces of memory stitched together. But with every note, he felt a little of the old version of himself returning. Not fully, not confidently, but enough to remind him that a part of that life had never truly disappeared. He stopped suddenly, letting his hands fall into his lap. His breathing was uneven, and his heart still raced, but he felt lighter somehow, as though he had released a part of himself he had locked away for too long. The room stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then someone let out a small breath, a sound of disbelief, a whisper of surprise. But no one laughed. No one mocked. Not anymore. He didn't lift his head. He didn't want to face their reactions yet. He felt vulnerable, exposed, like the entire room had just seen a part of him he had never planned to show. Then he heard footsteps approaching. Slow, measured, confident. The millionaire stepped closer, and the young waiter could feel his presence beside the piano. But he still didn't look up. The millionaire spoke in a calm, thoughtful voice. "There's more in you than you think." The words were gentle, almost quiet, but they carried weight. Enough weight to make the waiter lift his eyes just slightly. The millionaire didn't smile or show off. He simply studied the young man with the same curious, knowing expression he had shown from the beginning. "You're not done," he said softly. "Not even close." The young waiter didn't understand what he meant. Not yet. But he felt something shift inside him, something small, something warm, something that felt almost like hope. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he could keep playing, or if he even should. But he knew one thing for certain. The silence he had lived in for years had finally cracked open. And once a silence like that breaks, it never fully goes back to the way it was. The next morning began with a soft light slipping through the tall windows of the guest house, casting a warm glow across the room where the young waiter slept. He woke slowly, still feeling the echo of the previous night spinning somewhere inside his mind. What had happened on that stage didn't feel real yet. He kept seeing the stunned faces, hearing the silence that came right after his last note, and remembering the way the millionaire had looked at him with. something completely different from the earlier harshness. He sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of it all. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't let himself feel in years: hope. It wasn't loud or overwhelming. It was quiet, almost shy, but real enough to make his chest tighten. He washed up, changed back into his simple clothes, and stepped outside. A light breeze carried the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen area of the mansion. Workers were already moving around, preparing for the day. Some of them, who had barely noticed him before, gave him small nods. A few even whispered something to each other. He wasn't sure if they recognized him from last night, but a part of him suspected they did. He walked toward the side gardens, unsure where he was going, but needing some space to think. The mansion grounds were quiet, almost peaceful, the type of peace he wasn't used to. Back home, mornings were loud and rushed, filled with chores, street noise, and his mother's tired voice trying to keep everything together. Thinking about her made his chest ache. He wished she could have seen what happened. He reached a quiet corner of the garden, where a small fountain stood surrounded by white flowers. He sat on a stone bench, leaning forward with his hands clasped. That moment at the piano felt like something had been unlocked inside him, something he had buried under work, exhaustion, and life's daily pressures. He didn't know if last night meant anything for his future, or if everything was about to return to normal. But he wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. As he sat there, lost in thought, he heard footsteps approaching. They were slow, steady, and confident. When he looked up, he saw the millionaire walking toward him. The man carried a presence that was impossible to ignore. The waiter quickly stood up, unsure how to act. The millionaire raised a hand. "Relax, sit." He hesitated, but slowly sat back down. The man took a seat beside him, though not too close. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the fountain filled the silence. Finally, the millionaire spoke. "Last night was not what I expected." His voice wasn't cold like before. It carried something heavier, something thoughtful. The young waiter didn't know what to say, so he stayed quiet. "I thought you were just another worker," the man continued. "Someone who wasn't meant to be on a stage. Someone who didn't belong there. I thought wrong." The waiter felt a swirl of emotions: confusion, gratitude, doubt. He lowered his eyes. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The millionaire asked. The young man took a deep breath. "My mother taught me when I was small. She used to clean houses to earn a little money. One of the places she worked had an old piano. She'd practice during breaks. She wasn't trained, but she loved music. She taught me everything she knew." The millionaire listened without interrupting. "We couldn't afford lessons," the waiter went on. "So whatever I learned came from watching her, copying her, and practicing whenever I found a chance." He paused, then added softly, "But later, life got harder. I had to stop. Work became more important." The millionaire leaned back slightly, considering his words. "And yet you played as if you never stopped." A faint smile crossed his face. "Talent like that doesn't disappear." The waiter looked down at his hands, the same hands that had stunned the room full of wealthy guests. Those hands had also washed countless dishes, carried trays, and scrubbed stubborn stains from tables. For a moment, the contrast felt overwhelming. "Do you want to keep playing?" the millionaire asked. The question struck him deeply. He lifted his head slowly. "I don't know if that kind of life is meant for someone like me." The words slipped out before he could stop them. The millionaire shook his head. "That's not an answer. I'm asking what you want, not what you think you deserve." The waiter swallowed hard. "I want to play again," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to learn properly. I want to see how far I can go. Good, the millionaire said. That's honest. Silence hung between them again, but this time it felt lighter. I'm hosting another event next month, the man went on. A much larger one. The audience will include musicians, producers, and people who understand real talent. I want you to play there. The waiter's heart skipped a beat. Me? But I'm just, don't say it, the millionaire interrupted gently. You're more than that. Last night proved it. The young man stared at him, unsure if he could trust what he was hearing. It felt too big, too unexpected. You won't be forced, the millionaire added. It's your choice. But if you agree, I'll make sure you get the guidance you need. The waiter felt his breath catch. He hadn't expected anything like this. He had come to the mansion simply to work, to earn a little money and support his family. But now he was being offered something he had only dreamed of. Why would you help me? He finally asked, his voice quiet but full of uncertainty. The millionaire looked toward the fountain. Because I was wrong about you. And because sometimes... He paused, choosing his words. Sometimes people like me forget where real talent is found. We look for it in high places, polished places, trained places. But last night reminded me that talent can come from anywhere. The waiter listened closely. Seeing you play. The man continued. It made me remember someone I used to know. Someone who loved music, but couldn't afford chances either. His voice softened. Helping you. Feels like honoring that memory. The waiter felt something warm stir inside him. Gratitude, respect, a sense of being seen. Maybe for the first time. The millionaire then stood. Think about it. You don't need to answer now. He gave a small nod and walked away, leaving the young man sitting quietly by the fountain, overwhelmed. The offer felt unreal. It carried possibility and risk. But more than anything, it carried hope, a fragile but powerful thing. He stayed there for a long time, replaying everything in his mind. He thought of his mother, of her tired but loving eyes, and how she always said that music could open doors, even when life closed them. He thought of all the dreams he had tucked away in the corners of his mind. Maybe this was one of those doors. Later in the day, he returned to the kitchen area where the other staff worked. A few workers looked at him differently, not with envy, but with genuine curiosity. One of them whispered, "We saw you last night." That was something. He gave a small, shy smile. Thanks. Another worker, an older man who had been in the mansion for years, clapped him gently on the shoulder. You've got a gift, kid. Don't waste it. Hearing those words from someone who rarely spoke warmed him, but not everyone reacted warmly. A few workers who had always been dismissive now watched him with a mix of surprise and suspicion. Some wondered if he would act differently now. Others whispered theories about how he got to play on stage. He ignored the whispers. He had more important things to think about. By evening, he found himself back in the main hall, where the grand piano still sat. The room was empty, quiet, and filled with soft golden light from the chandeliers. He walked toward the instrument slowly, as if approaching an old friend. He hesitated before placing his fingers on the keys. His hands trembled slightly. But soon he began to play, softly at first, then stronger as the notes flowed naturally. The melody was not something he had learned. It came from his heart. Each note carried a memory, a dream, a piece of who he was. He closed his eyes and let the music speak for him. Little did he know. Someone was standing quietly at the doorway, listening. The millionaire watched him with thoughtful eyes, realizing the young man's talent was deeper than he had imagined, and this was only the beginning. The young waiter woke the next morning with a strange feeling in his chest, something warm and light that he had not felt in many years. He lay still for a moment, trying to understand it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't worry. It was something softer, something that made him breathe a little deeper. Maybe it was hope, though he wasn't used to calling it that. The memory of the previous night came slowly back to him. The glow of the restaurant lights, the quiet crowd, the sudden hush when he played, the encouraging words from the millionaire, the look on people's faces not of judgment, but of surprise and respect, the way the room seemed to shift, as if seeing him differently. He had not expected any of it. He had only played because he felt pushed into a corner. But something in him had changed the moment he touched the keys. He sat up and rubbed his face. The thought of returning to the restaurant made his stomach twist a little, but not from dread, more from uncertainty. He wondered what people would say. He wondered if they would ask him to play again. He wondered if he could even do it again. The melody he played the night before had come from pure instinct, pulled from some deep part of him that had been locked away for years. Could he still play if he tried with intention? He didn't know. He got dressed slowly and made his way to work. The usual morning breeze brushed against him as he walked, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and birds. Everything looked normal, but he felt different. He felt more aware of the world around him, like he had awakened from a long sleep. When he stepped into the restaurant, several staff members turned to look at him. Usually they barely noticed his arrival, but today they watched him with curious expressions. Not mocking, not annoyed, just curious. One of the servers nodded at him. Big moment last night? Another smiled softly. Didn't know you could play like that. Their voices carried something new, respect, maybe, or at least a willingness to see him in a different light. He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded and went to his usual place in the kitchen to pick up the morning tasks. The kitchen staff glanced at him too. A few of them whispered quietly. He pretended not to hear, though their tone didn't sound harsh. He focused on polishing glasses and organizing silverware. But his hands felt different today. When he touched the metal surfaces, he felt the faint memory of piano keys. Instead, as he arranged plates, he kept thinking about the millionaire's words. You're not done. Not even close. What did that mean? Why would someone so successful care about someone like him? What did the millionaire see in him that he couldn't see in himself? Late in the morning, the restaurant manager approached him. The manager didn't usually pay him much attention unless giving instructions. But today, he stopped and spoke quietly. There's something you should know. The young waiter looked up, unsure what to expect. The millionaire from last night asked about you, the manager said. He wants to meet you again this afternoon. Said it's important. A shiver went through his body. He didn't know if it was fear or excitement. Did he say why? The waiter asked. No, the manager replied. Only that you should come to the dining area after lunch service. The manager walked away, leaving him standing still, trying to make sense of it. All day, he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against him. Every minute seemed to stretch. Even small tasks took more effort because his mind kept drifting back to the piano, to the crowd, to the millionaire's quiet but heavy words. When lunch service ended, the manager nodded at him. He's waiting. The young waiter wiped his hands on a cloth, steadied his breath, and stepped into the dining area. The millionaire sat at a corner table, relaxed but focused, as if he had been thinking deeply about something. The young waiter approached slowly. You wanted to see me? He asked softly. The millionaire looked up with a calm, steady expression. Yes, sit. He obeyed, folding his hands in his lap. He felt strangely nervous, yet there was something comforting in the millionaire's gaze. You surprised everyone last night, the millionaire said. But I don't think you surprised yourself. Not fully. The waiter lowered his eyes. I haven't played in years. And yet, the millionaire replied, when you touched the keys, It was clear that music is still a part of you. The waiter didn't know what to say. He felt exposed, as if the millionaire could see every hidden part of him. The millionaire leaned slightly forward. "Tell me, why did you stop playing?" The question hit him like a soft blow. He felt his throat tighten. Memories flickered, painful ones he kept buried. He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Life got hard," he said. "Things happened. I couldn't keep going. So I left it behind." The millionaire studied him for a long moment. Not judging, not pitying, just understanding. "I see," he said gently. "But leaving something behind doesn't mean it leaves you." The words settled into the waiter's heart with surprising force. The millionaire continued. "You have real talent, not just skill. Talent with emotion behind it. That is rare. And people felt it last night. I felt it." The waiter swallowed hard. He wasn't used to praise. It felt strange, almost unreal. "I want to help you," the millionaire said. "Not because I pity you, not because I want something from you, but because I believe you deserve a chance to use what you have." The waiter's breath caught. He stared in confusion. "Help me how?" The millionaire leaned back slightly. "I own several venues, music halls, training centers, and I know people who support emerging talent. I can offer you lessons with a respected pianist. I can give you time, space, and support to see what you're capable of." The waiter felt the world tilt slightly. He didn't know how to process the offer. It felt too big, too generous, too sunny. "I don't know if I can do it anymore," he whispered. "You can," the millionaire replied firmly. "You proved that last night." Silence hung between them for a long moment. The waiter's mind filled with thoughts, fear, hope, doubt, longing. He had run from music for so long that the idea of returning felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. But the thought of staying where he was forever felt equally frightening. "What if I fail?" he asked. The millionaire smiled faintly. "Then you fail, and you learn, and you grow. But you won't fail because you're not capable. You'll only fail if you never try." Those words sank deep. After a long moment, the waiter nodded slowly. Not a confident nod, not a bold one, but a sincere one. "I want to try," he said softly. The millionaire nodded with approval. "Good, then we begin." The following weeks became a strange, beautiful change in the waiter's life. He still worked at the restaurant, but fewer hours now. The rest of his time was spent practicing, learning, rebuilding the skill he thought he had lost. He started slow, playing simple pieces at first. His fingers were stiff, his timing uneven. But each day brought small improvements. People at the restaurant often paused to listen when he practiced after closing hours. Some brought him tea. Some offered quiet compliments. The staff, who once barely noticed him now, treated him as someone with a story worth seeing. The millionaire checked on him often, offering not pressure but support. He listened to the music with patience, giving gentle advice when needed. He encouraged the young man to trust himself, to let his emotions guide his playing. And slowly, bit by bit, the waiter transformed. His confidence grew. His hands steadied. His melodies deepened. His fear softened. His past started feeling less like a prison and more like a path that led him here. One evening, months after the night that changed everything, the millionaire arranged a small gathering at one of his music halls. Not a grand performance, not a huge crowd, just a group of people who believed in the young man's journey. The waiter sat at the piano once again. This time, his hands didn't shake. His breathing was calm. The lights felt warm, not harsh. He began to play. The melody flowed gently at first, then grew richer, fuller, carrying every struggle he had endured. Every moment he had doubted himself, and every piece of hope that had slowly grown inside him. The audience listened quietly, moved by the honesty in the music. When he finished, the room erupted into warm applause. The young man looked up, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The millionaire smiled proudly. The waiter realized then that he hadn't just rediscovered music. He had rediscovered himself. And this time, he wasn't going to let go.